Welcome to the first day of the rest of your lives. My name is Andy Zaremba, and with me behind the helm today is my brother Mike.
Oh, let me just switch that over there. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Welcome back to another episode. Pleasure to be here, and looking forward to today's episode.
Definitely. We always like the health and nutrition episodes. They're always interesting and always lots to dive into. And one thing, I wouldn't say the most controversial thing to talk about online, but one of the more controversial things happens to be food a lot of the time. People get really fired up about what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, what's healthy, what's not, what kind of information is out there, what you should listen to. And we're going to dive into all that today. But today, as usual, we're recording out of 70 West Godover Street here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, out of our business Float House. And if you haven't heard of floating, you can visit the website, floathouse.ca. We have all kinds of information about what we do here, but essentially what we do is we provide, well, I don't want to use the word sensory deprivation, but I'll say flotation therapy or REST, restricted environmental stimulus therapy / technique, which is something that we don't promote too much because it's a mouthful, but that is the more accurate term to describe our service. But the whole point of it really is to provide a sensory reduced environment where you're completely alone and isolated with just your body and your mind and your thoughts and what's going on inside. So it's amazing. It's an amazing environment just to connect with yourself, or take a break and disconnect from everyday life, especially when you're in a major metropolitan environment or an urban area. Sometimes you can't get away, and to have that nice cutoff and just really have that beautiful reset for all your senses, your nervous system, to help lower your stress levels, floating is definitely a great option for you. So do you want to add something?
I do. It's something I was thinking about today when I was putting on my shirt at the gym, and because I got my float shirt on, it says "Go float yourself," and on the back we have in little writing, and it's also on our front doors and on our sandwich boards on the sidewalk. I'm losing my camera here. Here,
I'll hold it for you while you talk.
Thank you. It says a Center for Healing and Higher Consciousness, and so that's something we haven't talked too much about on the show, but we kind of did this rebranding last summer, or just like, I don't know what you want to call it, I don't know, rebranding, but. And so we are a flotation center, but we also, have this wording, a Center for Healing and Higher Consciousness. So it's like, what does that mean? And, when we were in Peru, the gentleman that we were working with down there was telling about the two branches of shamanism. And there's kind of the branch of healing and higher consciousness and the branch of power and sorcery. And so that's kind of where we got this derivation from. And basically, the work that we see that we do here at Float House is providing the center, this space for people to do healing work, higher consciousness work, which means really like not necessarily like literally higher consciousness. It could just mean transcending limiting beliefs, transcending paradigms of your conceptual nature of reality. So that's kind of what we mean by that. And it's something that I thought we should maybe talk about because it is kind of, peppered through our website and on our center and stuff like that too. So
yeah, it's nice to get clear on that for sure. And it is sort of what we're about. And in a way too, it's a modality for transformation. Right. And we truly believe, like, if you really want to change yourself or change the world in general, it all starts within you and the change that you make within yourselves. So Float Tank is definitely a great avenue to explore that. I was having a conversation the other day with a gentleman that said he thought our tanks were too quiet. And I'm like, well, that's where the money is. That's where the gold is. When you get really quiet and you listen to yourself speak, you're gonna find a lot of the answers that you're looking for. So
it's where the rubber meets the road.
So if you'd like to give floating a try, use the promo code VancouverReal, and that will get you a 20% discount on a single float. And you can go to the website floathouse.ca to book at any of our locations, including our Edmonton location, all the way out there in Alberta. So. Moving right along,
yes,
we can talk about the Vancouver Real community next. We're happy that Candace and Sean are back from Bali, and they're here helping us out. We're going to have some meetups coming pretty soon. Well, we do have a meetup coming soon on April 11th.
Correct.
With Dr. Carlos De Leon, and it's going to be a fascinating talk and something I'm really interested in. What's the title again? It's
something about the shamanic universe.
The shamanic universe.
So it's going to be very much in line with our last episode with him, but just kind of going more in depth and a little more interactive. So definitely come check that out.
So that'll be on April 11th, and you can link up with that through the events page on vancouverreal.tv, or if not there, through the Vancouver Real community page on Facebook, and we have all of our events there. And we actually have it pinned to the top of the Facebook page as well right now, the Vancouver Real Facebook page. And lastly, we like to give a shout out to the Mindful Mass community. And fortunately, the city got back to us.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're going to let us do a meditation at City Hall,
Woohoo.
on the exterior of City Hall. So we're going to organize a giant mass meditation outside of City Hall. We don't have the dates locked down yet because we were actually aiming for the 20th, which is today, right? Is today the 20th? Mm-hmm. Which is the spring equinox, right?
Yes.
Obviously, that's not happening today because we're doing a podcast.
Right.
We're not planning a meditation. But we plan on doing one fairly soon, and it will most likely be at City Hall. So keep your eyes peeled for that. If you want to link up and do some giant public mass meditations with a group of people, go to Vancouver Meditation Mob. Or if you search that on Facebook, you'll find it. Or you can go to mindfulmass.org, and you can connect with us there.
Perfect.
Yeah. So today, I can't remember exactly how we got introduced. There's an email introduction at first, I think. But I'm really excited because I do like speaking about food and nutrition because it is such a vital part of being a human being. Mm-hmm. Like eating is so critical. And there's so much information out there today. It's really difficult to kind of sort through, everything that's out there and what's going to work for you and what's healthy and what's scientifically researched and what isn't. So, Sherry Strong, welcome to Vancouver Real.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you have a couple of different websites, and the one is returntofood.com, but the second one is free from sugar.
Sweet Freedom.
Sweet Freedom.
Yeah.
You see, that's Sweet Freedom. Because I'm reading it from your bio right here, and it says sugar-free naturally, so that's why I wrote
Free
that.
from sugar.
Free from sugar.
Sweet
Freedom. That's that's much better for sure.
Thank you.
So, and you consider yourself a food philosopher.
That's correct.
Right. And we were having a conversation before the podcast started about the body positive movement and that sort of thing. And you have a personal story of pretty big weight loss. And so do I, actually. At one point, I used to weigh 290 pounds, almost hit 300 pounds. And then when I lost it all, I went down to 205 pounds. And now I hover around 220, 225, in and around there. But this is obviously something you're very passionate about. So why don't we start there? What is a food philosopher?
Well, in Australia, if you ask them what a food philosopher is, they'll say a wanker.
Really?
Well,
wanker.
it's
those
kind
Australians,
of like,
they put it so.
Is that a marketing term? That kind of thing. And in truth, I literally have developed philosophies that help people relate to food, their body, and the planet in a much more natural way. Because one of the things I experienced, I was the Victorian chair of Nutrition Australia, and I was going out speaking at conferences. I was speaking at dietitians conferences, speaking to nutritionists, and I realized that the average person was suffering from nutritional confusion. And I would ask a corporate audience, I'd say, who here experiences nutritional confusion, and 40% of the hands would go up. And then what surprised me was when I would ask a newly graduated group of nutritionists who experiences nutritional confusion, 90% of the hands went up. And the truth is that it was probably more like 100%, but a lot of people think that by the end of their studies, they're meant to know everything. And so there's a little bit more arrogance than humility that happens with, people who've just learned a bunch of information. But the truth is that a lot of information actually leads to confusion, not clarity. Particularly if that information is not put into context. And so what the philosophies do is they actually help us take all that information and put it into context of how we're meant to eat as the human species on the planet. And the whole diet mentality is problematic because, we're working on this premise that we're meant to all eat one way. There is this optimal way of eating. And in fact, biodiversity of the planet depends on us all eating differently. So there's that goes on. And then there's the whole business of nutrition, which has really messed people up because a large part of nutrition is run now by corporate interests. It certainly was when I was studying at Deakin University in Australia. There'd be things like lecture notes on dairy, and the Dairy Corporation logo was on the notes. So they were actually supplied by the Dairy Corporation.
Were they funding the studies and everything, and the research?
We know now that the universities are influenced by funding. Right. So whether it's the food industry or the pharmaceutical or the supplement industry, it's just one way of them helping, perpetuate the model. And so what happens is if people don't question and they're coming out of university, they're getting lots of conflicting bits of information, and they're almost, I think what I observed was people were addicted to information but weren't trying to figure it out in the context of wisdom and how it was we were meant to be eating. So the philosophies really help us understand, well, how were we meant to eat as the human species? And when I started to look at it and observe it, I saw there was this hierarchy of how we're actually meant to eat in nature, and that it's different depending on where you are on the planet. And it's also different for the human species to, say, the chimpanzees or the bird life or the sea life, and that nature actually tells us what to eat and the quantities to eat it in by how easily it's obtained in nature. So that which is most abundant, we're meant to have the most of. So you think of the hierarchy: air, water, vegetation, and even in vegetation there's a hierarchy of what we're meant to be eating. So there's more species of vegetation here close to the ground, readily available, more available seasonally, so not only more species, whereas this, you have to work harder for it, you have to wait for it, not just to grow to maturity. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And if I gave you a choice between a broccoli seed and an apple seed and said, you get to choose one to plant, and you're hungry, what are you going to choose?
Broccoli.
Exactly, because even if I plant the apple seed and say it's already even a grown mature tree that's taken years to plant, when I plant the broccoli in spring, I'm going to have some vegetables readily available up until, August, September. Whereas with the apple seed, it comes to maturity in August and maybe into September, but it's only during the ripening process that it's edible. If you've ever made the mistake of picking an apple off the tree before it's ripened, it tastes terrible.
Yeah.
And here's the thing is that in the ripening process, most of the nutrients are actually infused into the fruit. So that's why if you have fruit that's picked green, even though it's mature, and it's put into storage and ripened with ethylene gases, that nutrient infusion hasn't happened in the ripening process, which is why, have you ever eaten an apple and you thought, I'm eating it because it's good for me, but there's no joy in this. You just kind of taste this sweet thing. But if you've eaten an apple that's ripened off the tree, you literally, it's just amazing because the phytochemicals, the aroma, flavor, and color compounds have been fully infused through along with the nutrients. And so you've got this amazing food experience. So nature tells us what to eat and the quantities to eat it in by how easily it's obtained in nature. So that which is most abundant, we're meant to have the most of. And then there's a hierarchy between it. That which is harder to obtain in nature, not only do we require less of it, nature makes us work harder for it. And so we start to work off the corresponding energy for the things that are higher in energy, you see? So that's why there's no such thing as obesity in nature. Nature makes us work off the higher energy foods. So
that makes sense. Yeah.
The only time you would find someone obese in nature is if they were like the head of the tribe or the cook of the tribe and they had access to a lot of food. They couldn't source all that food on their own. That was
right.
Do you see? So that's kind of how it happens.
Yeah, so the cook's there sneaking little bites in between meals, and the king, well, he just sits around and yells at people all day long.
He doesn't
or delegates,
source his own food.
or maybe he's a benevolent, leader.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. But
his time's best not used hunting and gathering, right?
Yeah.
And the last part is, so nature tells us what to eat and the quantities to eat and by how easily it's obtained. That which is most abundant, we're had to the most of, right? Sorry, getting so excited.
Yeah, no, it's good.
So harder to obtain, less of it, but we work harder for it. And then if you cannot get it in nature, not only do we not need it, it's harmful to the body and the planet. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now is most humans are actually eating in that third group. So you cannot get it in nature, and it's harmful to the body and the planet. And that's where obesity happens. Because the foods that actually make us obese, for the most part, are not foods that we source in nature.
You mean like they're refined? Is that what you mean?
Refined, processed, but even, so here's the thing. So we're either sourcing unnatural foods, we're eating unnatural foods, or we're eating natural foods unnaturally. And
like
so
too much fruit, for example.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Just,
exactly.
Picked too early fruit.
Yeah,
like
or things from all over the planet.
Right.
Oh, coconut oil is good. Well, let me put 5 tablespoons in my smoothie, as opposed to thinking, well, how much would I actually source and eat if I was eating this naturally?
Right. And would you even have access to it if you're eating it naturally?
And
Yeah.
you wouldn't have, 20 ingredients from different parts of the world put into a smoothie. When you think about it, like one compound can have over 2,000 ingredients in it, naturally occurring ingredients. And the body has to assimilate and appropriate that.
Now,
No,
do
sorry.
you look at this from like a point of view from your ethnic makeup and like where you kind of evolved from within the earth and what you should be eating that way? Or do you look at from where you actually live? Like my genes did not evolve in West Coast, North America. So how do you look at it? Do you like eat local or where your heritage is from? Or
Right.
is it like, how do you look at that question?
So first and primarily when I think about, eating according to nature, we ate according to our local environment. So local environment trumps our genetic history.
Okay.
But when
Right.
I'm working with clients who say have certain illnesses and they, their genetic history is, 1 or 2 generations from another area, I will actually sometimes encourage them to go back to that traditional diet, as much as they can by sourcing seasonally, locally organic and whole. But bringing that in. But universally, the recipe for healing is more what is most easily obtained in nature.
Gotcha.
Those are the things that are the most nourishing and the most cleansing to the body.
Right, because if I was a nomadic person back in the day, my genes may still have evolved from like thousands of miles away, but due to whatever circumstances, I'm now here. I'm going to eat
correct.
what's there. I'm not going to get anything from back there. So
That's
you kind of
correct.
eat what's around, but like you said, like doing that hierarchy of.
And I think that's really interesting.
That's
It's a neat way to think about it too, because it is pretty logical when you break it down into that hierarchy of what's most available,
Yeah.
and the things that are the hardest to obtain. You would work harder for.
Yes.
Therefore, you wouldn't have the calorie buildup that you're retain the calories from it as much because you've had to work so hard to get it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that to me brings to mind like hunting and animals would be like the hardest things to probably
Yes.
get, where then the things that are growing and fruit like you broke down. So yeah,
Exactly.
really smart. Yeah.
So, and if you think about it, most hunter-gatherers, they ate 11 to 15 plant species to every animal species they ate. And even amongst the animal species, there's a hierarchy in which they would eat, from
Sure.
insects to rodents to fish to then, and
Shellfish.
so when I ask people, okay, so imagine sourcing your food in nature. Well, actually, I would typically ask an audience, if you had a choice between chicken or an omelet tonight, what would most of you choose? And the majority of the hands go up, excluding vegetarians, obviously, to say chicken. And it's because the more, the higher up on the hierarchy of nature and animal species, is the more addictive it is. So chicken's more addictive than eggs. When I ask them the choice between fish and chicken, they'll say chicken over fish.
Now, what do you
Yeah.
mean by addictive there?
Okay, so animals are addictive. Like, try and give up meat if you're a true carnivore, and you realize that there's addictive substances. There's hormones. There's chemicals within the animal. Even if it's a grass-fed or wild animal, it still has hormones in it, and
Right.
and the body has addictive responses to
Right.
it.
So like
right? So it's not just
the type of
nourishment.
nutrients in that is so high quality for us, because back in the day it was so hard to get and so rare to
Yeah.
get, that it's like, yeah, this is amazing nourishment for me. However, it's very hard to get,
That's correct.
post industrialization or
Yeah.
whatever.
So
Or
when I ask
agriculturalization.
when I ask the audience the same question and say, okay, you have to go out in nature and kill it, what would you have, an omelet or catch, kill, pluck, disembowel, and bleed a chicken and prepare it? Most people become vegetarian.
Right.
But even so, I said that the most hardened carnivore, if they're given a choice between an omelet, to make an omelet from the eggs or the chicken, they would think twice about killing the beast that produces an ongoing source of protein.
Yeah.
Right? So you see, we have a very different relationship with food when we have to source it ourselves. And I remember giving a presentation in Australia, and I was talking about, if you had a choice between killing a chicken or a lamb, what would most people kill?
Chicken.
Exactly. And then this guy pipes up from the audience and goes, I don't mind killing a lamb. And I'm like, oh, really? Nice.
Well,
right?
you're a special gentleman, sir.
Exactly. So I said, okay, fair enough. He said, I'm, third generation lamb farmer, and sorry,
Right.
Australians, I still, after 22 years, still can't do a proper Australian
It's pretty
accent.
good actually.
For Canadians, maybe. But I said to him, do you remember the first time you killed a lamb? And his whole physiology changed. So he went from the cocky,
Right.
larrikin to his shoulders slumped over and his head actually went down without me saying a word. And I said, did you have to cut off a part of you that was human in order to kill that lamb? And he nodded. He said, yeah. So this is the thing that we're no longer having this relationship with, that we're no longer connected not only to the beast, but to the sacrifice of the animal and what that does to our psyche as a
Totally.
species.
Well, the only thing I can relate to that is when I go fishing.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, I fish, we pull the fish out of the water, it dies, or we kill it. Or the other time is when we're going for lobster, actually. And we'll go get a lobster, and you pull it out of the water. And when you get to land, the thing's still alive. And it's like, okay, well, you're going to have to do this now.
Yes.
And my whole rationale around it is like, if I'm going to eat meat, then I feel like I should be able to do that.
Yes.
And even it's a lobster. It's a lobster, and that's pretty low on like it's a crustacean. It's not even close to a mammal.
Yes.
And I feel a little bad when I cut that lobster's tails off, and then we don't just put it in boiling water. We cut the tail off and then throw it away, and it dies. But it's like. So in a way, this is my weird justification for eating meat, because I'm like, I can do that, but I do feel a little bit bad when I do, and then I'm sure after a while you become numb to it. If you were doing it like ongoing, it become like a assembly line almost in a sense. But but the interesting thing about that is if you're, like, say, in a hunter-gathering situation and you're the hunter, then you're going to have to do that.
That's correct.
Right. So it's like now. You say like cutting off a part of your humanity, but if it's actually essential to your survival, not essential, but part of your survival, that is part of you being human.
So here's the question that I have, and for a good part of humanity, it was essential. But this whole kind of, eat paleo, eat like a caveman, all that kind of thing, which is, I get the piece around not eating processed food. And I think that's where it's the most valid. But there's a lot of things we don't do like paleo humans. We don't club our wives, or drag them by the hair. We don't live in caves. We don't, war with, blunt instruments, typically. We are a species that thrives on evolving. And the question I always plant in my own head, because I'm not a purist, I'm not a vegan, right? But the question I plant in my head and with my students is, if we can as a species evolve to the point where we don't actually have to take a life or kill a life, and we can actually artfully curate our diet so that it includes all the nutrients we need, wouldn't that be a much more higher conscious and evolved way of actually being? And the point I like to draw, because one of the things I won't eat is veal or lamb. And I think I remember years ago when I made that decision I thought, imagine an alien life force that came to Earth, and the only thing they ate were little beautiful, tender, little sweet human babies because they tasted the sweetest. We would think that they were one of the most horrific species in the universe, wouldn't we? We would think that's absolutely horrible. But for some reason, we don't mind killing the babies of cows and sheep. And we kind of have this disconnect. So, and it's not for me about being judgmental or puritanical. It's about a process of evolution, of questioning and finding a better way forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you could also argue, like, their whole artificial intelligence conversation. If artificial intelligence comes along and it becomes superior to human beings, which is maybe a little more closer to home than the alien analogy, but it's like, if they started saying, oh, humans can be expendable, how would we feel about that morally, right? Because it's, for some reason, it sees us as expendable, right? It's a good question. It's something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately. And, there does seem to be some innovations coming, like, for example, meat grown in petri dishes and things like that, where it's like there's basically no suffering. It's just the cells of that meat that are reproduced.
Yes.
So, I mean, ideally, for sure, if you can minimize the suffering, I think that's definitely a great thing. And I think if there is some benefit to having that animal protein and you can get it in a non-suffering way, then that's great as well. But the other thing is, too, it's like, let's say for now, we want or need to have some animal protein. It's like, well, how much do you actually need? That's a really good question to ask, right? So you might need a little bit. Like, the old guide would be like, you need like the palm of your hand or something like that. That's how much meat you need a day. And a lot of people eat a lot more than that. That's for sure.
Yeah, and not only that, we're eating it not just unsustainable in the amounts, but we're eating it unsustainably in what we're feeding the animals, how we're housing the animals. The environmental impact that that's having is devastating for the planet, and not just the gases. We're talking about the store. Sorry,
it's okay.
The store off of off gassing, the urine, the drugs in the animal, that kind of thing, the diet that they're actually eating, and then unnatural amounts. And it's like the whole kind of concept of, in a tribe, there is no such thing as everyone's having, filet mignon for dinner tonight.
Right.
If you think about an animal that was used in a tribal thing, that was one piece of a whole beast, and that the whole beast was used, and it was, so there's a lot, around just that piece. But even, we just have consumed without consideration of the long-term effects, not just animals, but even talking about tropical fruits.
Sure.
We can go on about everything in our food system. We just think, well, if we can have it, we should have it.
Right.
Like spoiled children.
For the last 100 years or whatever, maybe the last 50 years, I'm not exactly sure how long, it's been very abundant, and pretty much everything's been at our fingertips, and we don't really see where our food's coming from. So there is a major disconnect there for sure for a lot of people. So let's say, for example, we become aware of this, and we want to start adopting a new style of eating that is going to be more sustainable for ourselves, going to give us better health, more sustainable for the planet.
Yes.
Where does somebody start? Because it feels like, here's the other thing too, is like we talked about this, there's so much information these days. It's like, what do you listen to? What's correct? What's not? So I assume you have some sort of system laid out or some sort of recommendations. So
absolutely. And probably the easiest way to start for everyone is to think of the acronym SLOW: seasonal, local, organic, and whole. And the best way to start out with that is to get yourself to a farmer's market. It really is, it's a much more natural way of shopping, relating to your food, relating to the people who are actually sourcing your food. And just by that move alone will dramatically change your relationship to food and sourcing what's good for you based on what's in season. You get an understanding of what we're meant to be eating that time of the year, but also that's coming usually from within 100-mile radius. So we're having less of an imprint, footprint on the planet.
Right, so that's a good place to start for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, when somebody starts making that transition, what do you think? What benefits are they going to start seeing right off the bat?
Well, one of the things, they're going to start to have a different relationship to even sourcing your own food. I think what happens in the supermarket is it deconstructs and it detaches us from our natural relationship to understanding what's available. But the big thing is that there's going to be a lot less processed food at the farmer's market. And don't get me wrong, you can find processed food there. It's not impossible to source. But primarily, there's a lot more people selling vegetation at the good farmers markets anyway. And, you can find it organically. So as you start to eliminate the processed food from your diet, the really standard things that I've noticed over the years are, well, if you think about it, just one ingredient, refined sugar, is connected to 144 diseases and conditions. So Dr. Nancy Appleton has shown us the science that it's directly related. So it's not just the big ones: obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and now Alzheimer's, which they're calling diabetes type 3. So diabetes in the brain. Okay, so
they might be sugar related, that one.
It is. It absolutely is.
That's fact?
That's conclusive. Yes. Just do some research about diabetes type 3. So we're seeing that it's definitely sugar related. And so once we start to get just that one ingredient out, and again, it's available at farmers markets, but you can be selective and start to learn to avoid it. But if you think, I call it the lethal recipe, and the lethal recipe is anything that's processed in the same way we take a natural product and turn it into a highly addictive drug. So in its natural state, cane juice is not toxic or addictive. Okay, it's hard to obtain, so you eat less of it, right? If you chew on the cane, it's only through mechanization.
It's all fibrous, and you have to chew it up, and it's much,
sure. So children who grew up on the plantations, who were the children of plantation workers, could not have access to refined sugar. It was too expensive. There was no incidence of diabetes or lifestyle diseases or dental caries with these children. They had great teeth, no cavities, and definitely no diabetes. Whereas the children of the plantation owners who had access to plenty of refined sugar, dental caries, diabetes, and jaw malformations, things related to lifestyle diseases. So if you think about it in its natural state, I remember when I first started to learn how sugar was made, and I was like, gee, I've never made heroin before, but I'm quite certain there are similarities in the processes. Mm-hmm. And there are. And so I started to look at how sugar was made, and then I saw that that's the same thing. When you take opium sap in its natural state, it's not addictive or toxic like the cane juice, but you start to remove all the macro and micronutrients, the phytochemicals, the vitamins and minerals, and you turn it into this pure white substance. It becomes addictive and toxic, just like coca leaves, not addictive or toxic. Process them to the white stage, it becomes addictive and toxic. So now you've got not just refined sugar in our system, but we've got refined sugars, oils, salts, grains, and chemicals that are in our food. That's kind of the lethal recipe. But anything can be processed this way. And so what happens is now we're eating a lot of food. It's that third area of that which you could not find in nature, because you couldn't make any of those things in nature. Right. Those are the result of machinery. So now the body's actually eating this food, and it does this really clever thing that we think is somehow a mistake, but it's the body trying to protect itself. It actually shuts off the mechanism that says stop eating. And the reason it does that is because there's no nutrients in the food. So it's like, feed me more, I'm not getting what I need. It shuts off that mechanism, whereas that's why it's impossible to become obese eating those foods in their natural state, because they're full of nutrients. The body says, I've had my nutrients, stop eating, right? So
is that one sort of proven as well?
Yeah. So if you look at particularly refined sugar and high fructose corn syrup, it actually shuts off the mechanism within the brain. I mean, I'm putting the meaning on it as far as the reason why it's doing that. Anytime there's a universal body response or egoic response, or I see it as a tool of evolution for the human species to survive, and it makes perfect sense.
Right.
So the science is not saying this is why you're doing it. That's my interpretation of the body's always trying to protect itself. And in nature, it works for us. And in an unnatural world, it works against us.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, so you really dove into sugar there and like the refinement process of it all.
Yes.
And it's like anything that we sort of refine in its non-refined state. It usually isn't that bad for us, but when we distill it down to its purest form, that's when it becomes addictive or harmful to us, right?
Yes, and because we've removed the life-saving, nourishing properties in it. Right? So we would never consume that in nature. It wouldn't make sense. It's like flour. Why would you take the most nourishing parts and throw it away and just be left with the pure energy form?
Right.
Wouldn't make sense in a natural environment. It would be, you would look at that people that were taking all the nutrients out and you go, not very smart race.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you were trying to sell them lots of stuff because, again, you can eat a lot more of food without nutrients in it.
Right. And this is where it's kind of like turned into, a chicken and an egg thing too, because like there's so many forces at play that impact our dietary habits that are built off of partially just genetic momentum and societal evolution, and then capitalism and industrialization, and this and then you start adding in mental health complexes and social stresses and political pressures and all these things. They are kind of intertwined, and we're always, it seems like, for whatever kind of issue we're highlighting on this show or in general, there's like this, we're stuck in this momentum from the past.
Yes.
And I think it's important this is my belief, to acknowledge that it's not that these were necessarily fully conscious decisions that took in part of every single variable that's possible, because that's impossible. But it's like what your role as a food philosopher is to like, okay, let's take a step back and maybe get off the momentum wheel a little bit, and actually let's look and think about what's really happening. Can we bring more things together? Is that kind of like how you see your role a little bit?
Absolutely. And so as much as I go into the geeking out of the science and the nutrition and nature and that kind of piece, what I do know is that it's way more than just the intellectual exercise of our relationship with food. And you'll get a lot of people who are very left brain, and they're like, food is fuel. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, but there's also this incredible pleasure side of food, and there's this social side to food. And when we just approach food that's one of the problems with the diet mentality. And I know you had a guest on here previously that was saying that diets fail 95% of the time. And statistically, that's absolutely correct. But you know what? Nature works 100% of the time. Whole foods work 100% of the time. And so that's part of the equation. But we also have this very complex social relationship with food. And when we've evolved over thousands of years to celebrate and to have delicious foods and to experience the pleasure of food and to experience what I believe, and I've been speaking about for years, is that the social context in which we eat is as powerful as what we eat. Okay, so now what happens is we've got this breakdown of society, and most of us are eating in front of a computer or over the sink or at the counter. And so there's this disconnection. And one of the philosophies around return to food and is the social context in which we eat is nourishing. So we need to actually restore that piece. And I often say that I don't know if there are past lives or future lives, but what I do know is if there is such a thing, I came to this incarnation for the food, right? So I love beautiful food. I love when it tastes good. I love sharing a meal with people who I care and respect and love and have great conversations about it. And what I find is that when I prepare food that's nourishing, energizing, protective, and I have it with people who are kind, loving, and positive, it becomes a spiritual experience. I often would say I'd much rather have a greasy bowl of noodles with people who are kind, positive, and loving than to have the most gourmet, nutritiously prepared meal with people who are angry, negative, and judgmental. But if you can combine something that nourishes, energizes, and protects and have it with people who are kind, or you even just lead the conversation, and express gratitude over that meal. The happiness researchers are showing that a child who's genetically predisposed to depression, just by having them share 3 things that they're grateful for at the evening meal, can turn them into a lifelong optimist. Wow. Right? So we're seeing that this whole disconnect, of families no longer eating together, and then having this food available in an unnatural way so that when people aren't feeling good about themselves, they then get a drug-like hit from the food that will distract them from the disconnection that's actually happening or the discomfort that they're feeling, within their lives. So as we start to get back to our nature as a species, that we aren't just animals that killed and hunted and gathered and lived to sustain ourselves. We have this complex social structure that when we connect to it, we have a much healthier relationship to our tribe and to our planet.
Yeah, and you definitely unpacked a lot of things there, and there's a lot of pieces there that are very systemic in nature, and it's really hard for us to encompass and incorporate all of those things you just suggested.
Yes.
So again, I come back to the question, like, how do we make this practical for people? Because, let's say you're a single parent and you're working 40 plus hours a week and you have to take care of your kid and they go to school and you only have your weekends or maybe even working on weekends as well. And it's like, and now you have to go to the farmer's market and pick up all these specialty foods and then go home and prepare it. And then you want to have a sit down dinner in like the 15 minutes that you have. You know what I mean? So how do we actually take this and make it all practical that people can incorporate it into a modern lifestyle?
Well, I think one of the things we need to start to look and deconstruct what part of the modern lifestyle is not working for us. I grew up with a mother who at times was a single mother who was not only working but going back to school, to better herself education-wise. We had limited resources, we had limited funds, but for the most part, we actually shared an evening meal. Like, it was crap food. It was terrible, but there was enough work that was put into it that just had my mother had a bit more education and understanding around food, that it's highly possible. I've shown people how you can eat organically for $70 a week. And there are books out there that show you how to eat organically for $5 a day per person. Wow. So it's not about it. It's not possible. It's an education issue. And can I tell you, it's not just socioeconomically driven as far as poor people being disadvantaged. When I gave that TED talk in Tokyo in 2009, I showed the Hungry Planet What the World Eats slides where you probably would have seen families that put their groceries out, a week's groceries out. And what that book illustrated so beautifully is the families with the most processed food were part of the countries that had the highest incidence of lifestyle diseases. And I think probably one of the biggest things there were two things that came out of it that I love to show people is one, there's a family in Bhutan who feeds 13 people for $5 a week, right? US.
Wow.
And at that time, so it's maybe $20 now. There's a mother in a refugee camp in Chad in Africa who fed her 5 children on what would probably cost us in Canada $30 to $50 a week. Now, here's the fascinating thing. You look at the mandible and the teeth and the eye clarity and the skin of those children, there's no diabetes. There's no lifestyle diseases. They might be vulnerable because of their circumstances as far as, communicable diseases or, cleanliness issues, that kind of thing.
But the lifestyle diseases.
They had no lifestyle diseases. So, and I would say, I wonder if this woman, when she's feeding her children, dinner, is saying, don't worry about finishing everything on your plates, kids. There's obese kids in America, right? And I said, before you think I'm being cavalier about it, 27,000 children, 27 million, was it 27? Forgive me. It was around 27,000 children a day were dying due to starvation. And yet, if you look at the statistics for children who are suffering or dying because of lifestyle diseases, it is in the millions. Okay, so here we can have children eating better in a refugee camp than kids in a private school here in, Vancouver.
Right. The stat I heard was something along the lines of 3 million people. I'm not sure if this is North America or what it is, but I heard the numbers. 3 million people die of obesity-related issues, and 1 million people, maybe probably a year, die of starvation now. So it's now the obesity epidemic is actually killing more people than starvation.
Yes, and it's also killing our planet. So there's this, what's good for the body is good for the planet, and what's good for the planet is good for the body.
Now, let's go into that a little bit, the environmental issues. So, a lot of people who have or listened to this podcast have probably watched the documentary, or at least heard of the documentary Cowspiracy.
Yes.
So that's where I get most of my sort of food-related environmental issues from. Mm-hmm. And it does make sense if you watch that documentary. But maybe you have some more information along that about how the food we eat is directly damaging damaging the environment.
Well, it totally is. One, because we're eating a larger volume of food because we're denaturing the amount of nutrients. When you have wild food, it actually requires very little food to sustain you. In caloric restriction, we're seeing that there is, when it's nutrient dense, there's a connection with longevity. And no matter how politically correct some people are to the opposite. And so if we look at the amount of animals we're consuming, completely unsustainable. Then if you look at their diets, not only, it's just, so unsustainable as far as what we're actually using in plant foods and then denaturing those plant foods and then putting drugs into animals. But it's not just animals in Cowspiracy. And one of the things I took issue with their second film, What the Health, is they were basically saying that sugar doesn't cause diabetes. And in fact, at the end of the Vancouver premiere, that was the question they asked: what doesn't cause diabetes? And they were giving out prizes, and everyone went, sugar. And I'm like, bullshit. Sorry, can I swear?
Yeah, of course. Fine.
Okay. I'm like, this is such a dangerous message. And so
what were they saying causes diabetes then?
Meat. They're saying that there's basically...
How is that?
There's the science that they were referring to is that there's a component in meat that blocks receptors within the liver to be able to break down sugars, which, even if that is true, and, for all, to give them credit for the science, that might be true. Being vegan does not prevent or protect you against diabetes if you're eating tons of sugar. And so what happens is you'll find a lot of vegans, they'll give up meat, which is addictive, and replace it with another addictive substance, which is sugar. And you look at, vegans and their relationship to sugar, and it's definitely, connected. So it's not, I think, a simple answer, and the solution's not necessarily simple, but we definitely need to start looking at this in a much more holistic way. We need to understand how we're meant to be eating as a species and not just have these knee-jerk reactions. Okay, we're just going to stop eating meat, but we're going to eat lots of soy that's denatured. That probably wasn't a crop that we were meant to be eating as the human species anyway, right?
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yeah, one of these themes that I've come up on this podcast before is the idea of voting with your dollars.
Yes.
So if you want to make some change in the world and you think that you can live in a way that's going to benefit people and you support that with how you buy and what you purchase, well, that's probably a great way to create change is by changing your own personal habits, and therefore, like, the market will respond to that, right?
Yes.
So what would you say? About the idea of people taking personal responsibility over their health, and as opposed to waiting for the system or legislation or whatever to change.
Oh, it's a great question. And when I was in Australia, I was on government boards. I was, Victorian chair of Nutrition Australia, so I saw how it worked. I was invited onto government boards to advise the government as far as nutritional policies and changes. And I remember being on that board and very quickly understanding, oh, I get it. Okay, change is not going to happen from the government.
Yeah, too slow.
It's way too slow,
bureaucratic,
too bureaucratic.
Yeah.
Everyone's afraid to make a decision, and some of the most obvious things, they're so emotionally attached to it. It's crazy. And so the change will actually happen by us understanding, like us actually not just understanding intellectually how we're meant to eat as a species, but then starting to slowly implement that and realize, oh my goodness, I actually feel so much better when I eat this way. I feel so much better when I don't eat this stuff. Or, when I just have a lot more plant foods than I'm having of animal, foods. And if I'm not eating those, those forms of vegetation that were actually meant for another species. It's about really kind of starting to be more mindful and thoughtful about the process of how we're actually procuring our food. And I often think of the human species as a very selfish species, like kind of, we're given dominion over the animals. Oh, let's eat them all. So there's a great Far Side cartoon, and it's got this couple that are coming home from a night, and then inside the door is a woman who's like a witch. And they're like, what? Sorry, we hired you to take care of our children. Instead, you cooked and ate both of them.
Yeah.
And so I think of the human species like given dominion over the animals and like, oh, let's just eat them all. Let's torture them and be mean to them. We're lost this kind of how we're meant to eat as a species. Even if we are, killing them in nature, it was a clean kill. We knew that was a
minimal
far superior.
suffering.
Absolutely.
So you've mentioned that, you acknowledge that you're not a purist. You do eat meat. So how do you, knowing all this and saying all this, like, how do you what's your relationship to it? Like, how do you approach it? And just kind of give us your personal philosophy on it, sort of thing. And like how you work with it within your life practically.
So my relationship would be described as conflicted. Okay. And so when I think about having meat, I am a true carnivore. Like, if I actually look at my digestive system and how it works, I, crazily enough, have better elimination with some meat in my diet. Obviously, too much, it creates way too much of a taxation on my system. But I'm open to being able to eat as a species without having to kill another species. And I see it as a step and an evolutionary process. And I try not to be judgmental to myself, but trying to find that balance of not being judgmental, but also encouraging myself to eat more and more plant-based things and more complex plant-based, more nutrient-dense plant-based
So
way of eating.
what kind of animal protein would you eat? Like until the Petri meat thing came up, like maybe 5 years ago max, right? Like that's a pretty new evolution. Like how, what other options are there for that?
Yeah. So if I'm thinking about animal products, so eggs would probably be my
okay. So
because I'm not taking a life. I'm not taking a life for that. But saying that, occasionally, if I'm at a dinner and someone's got a naturally raised chicken and they've killed it and they haven't, but they've procured it and it's ethically procured, I'm not going to go. I actually really enjoy it. So it's just about finding that kind of balance, but I really do strive to have as much as I can plant-based.
Right.
We could probably switch gears a little bit into because we were talking beforehand about the body positive movement and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And even yourself, you said you have a pretty big success story for weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
You lost a lot of weight in a pretty decent amount of time. Is that how the story goes?
So I was in my mid-20s, and I was twice my present size. So I wasn't 10'4". I haven't had a massive height reduction, right? I could literally now fit into one pant leg of the pants I wore at my biggest. So I've been obese, and I knew that dieting didn't work. So for me, dieting didn't work, and I had to find a way to lose that weight, because I knew it would end up, killing me early without dieting. And so that was a process, and the biggest thing for me was moving my body. So going out, I started running. And by starting to run and move my body, I started to crave healthier foods. And so it was just, one fed the other. Remember, nothing happens in nature without moving our body, right? We starve in nature if we don't move our body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so exercise was vital, and I'm guessing changing the foods that you're eating.
Absolutely, yeah. But the bigger piece was the emotional relationship. I was using food as a drug. I was using food as a way of dealing with any uncomfortable emotions that I had. So I had a very difficult childhood. Sort of my siblings, my parents were having kids. My mom was 20 when she had me, and she already had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And 2 years later, my brother came along.
Wow.
They were, my parents were from abusive homes. And so
lots of family trauma.
Yeah, lots of trauma. And I was sexually abused as a 5-year-old. And then,
Right. Dr. Gabor Mate has a really good quote about addiction, and it's basically, it's something that you can't stop, that you do all the time, that is causing you harm, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And it can be from anything, right?
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily have to be like a drug or substance related or alcohol. It can be food, like you just said.
Yeah.
And you said yourself, like, you're emotionally eating and changing that relationship. So it wasn't necessarily, it was like a total life overhaul in a sense, because you had to change your exercise habits, change your diet habits, and then also do like personal work as well to get over that.
And another piece, I often say that addiction is your body's way of telling you you're not listening to your soul. And one of the things that was a big piece for me.
Why is that?
Well, I believe our soul is our true nature, and we come to this planet pretty pure, and then we live in, environments or households or social constructs that often give us mixed messages that say, no, don't trust your spirit, don't trust your soul, do work that is for money, that totally is against your value system, or just makes you feel like crap.
I'm saying more like, why if you're not eating the right, or if you're having addiction, why are you not listening to your soul?
Well, I'm saying that the addiction is where we go because we're not listening to our soul. So it feels icky to not listen to our soul. And so we just push that down with food, substances, or behaviors.
So it's a way of numbing ourselves.
Yeah.
Or just shifting the energy. That's how I look at it, even within myself personally. It's like I'll relate to it. Ooh, there's my camera down. Is like acknowledging within myself when I'm feeling something that I don't want to feel, and then I'll go and buy that bag of chips at the gas station and pound it in the car before I get home.
Yeah.
That's pretty specific because it's happened many times. And so it's like, but then I always go back and like, well, what was it that I was feeling at that moment that I wanted to not feel?
Yes.
And I also saw that with my relationship with cannabis as well.
Yeah.
Is like, why am I using this plant, this amazing plant? But what's the intention behind it? Was it unconscious? And am I just trying to shift from what I'm feeling right now? And that's what you're kind of saying, is like, that's what your soul is trying to talk to you with this feeling, with this sensation, with this mood, or whatever, maybe the thoughts or whatever it is. But you're like, nah, I don't want to do that, because that's the hard work.
Yeah. And can I tell you, our relationships with food are so incredibly complex. And, I've been doing this work for decades now. And I had this weird kind of phenomenon that would go on. I'd go out and I would give a presentation, and the puritanical Sherry would come out. And I always knew puritanical Sherry, when she came out, on the way home, I would be craving donuts or something like that. And it was almost like me kind of course correcting and being congruent, like, because I'm not a purist. I love a good donut, right?
Sure.
Amen.
And I believe that, it's that concept in my book. I talk about pick your poisons, that every traditional culture had something they smoked or ate or, consumed or behaved in a behavior that altered their state. And that was just part of one of the fun things about the human experience, is that we interacted with our physical world in that way. And so I still think that there's space for that. But what I, am learning to do is the more mindful and consciousness. So instead of feeling shame about that behavior, when I start to go, shed some light on it. Okay, so why am I behaving that way? Oh, it's because I'm standing up in front of an audience and projecting that I'm like this really pure kind of angelic eater. And the truth is that, I'm...
Sometimes you indulge.
Absolutely. And like I say, I came to this incarnation for the food. I don't think there's been a better time on the planet to be a human, to access the most amazing food on the planet. And I'm a hedonist. I'm a pleasure seeker.
Right. Well, and again, we kind of got away from the whole body positive conversation a little bit, but we were touching the surface, and there is a lot of messaging today around accept yourself the way you are.
Yes.
And I definitely do think there is a place for that, like we were talking about before. Like if somebody feels terrible about themselves and they need to get themselves out of that state, then great.
Yes.
But I'm guessing you're going to say that there's probably some dangers with promoting such a mentality.
Absolutely. And I say this from being an obese person. And I remember when I was obese, I would be very defensive. I would have been very defensive listening to myself right now. Okay. In that, I would say I was big boned, I was just genetically set up to be obese or whatever, that kind of thing. And the truth is that I did look at food and gain weight, right? But the thing is that the disconnect was I looked at food, I ate food, I gained weight. And I ate a lot of it. Like I used to start off the morning with half a liter of Sara Lee Ultra Chocolate ice cream and not stop eating until I went to bed that night.
Well, there's a problem right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Half a liter of the ice cream first thing in the morning?
Yeah.
That'll get you.
Yeah. And so I actually know what it takes to sustain the body food-wise or get to the place where you're obese or morbidly obese. You couldn't source that food in nature. So what happens now is with the body positive, and don't get me wrong. So I was an obese woman. When I went out running, I would have people like young guys leaning out of the car, yelling at the truck, and jeering, "Get your fat ass off the street, and
whatever.
Horrible,
obscene gesture.
horrible things. And I remember feeling absolutely crushed. So here's the good side of the body positive movement. Every human being deserves to be treated equally and loved unconditionally. So when you're looking at someone who is morbidly obese, they deserve to be loved and appreciated and respected like any other person on the planet. But at the same time, it's important to look at the person and not argue for their limitations, in the sense of, yes, you have an obese body. You have, and I even go to the point where no one is fat, right? There's way more to you than a fat person. So I don't even like the expression, you're fat. No, you have fat on your body, but you are not fat. But what's happened with a lot of people is because they've tried dieting and it doesn't work, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. And they go, well, I'm just never going to diet anymore. And I agree, don't diet, because diets fail, because they work against how we think as the human species. So that's one of the reasons they don't work. But as I said before, whole foods, eating a natural diet works 100% of the diet at time. So learning to actually recondition our neural pathways that in the past have said, I feel like this, I eat this. So we need to recondition that piece, and then starting to access foods that are nourishing, energizing, protective. And then we start to observe how that actually makes us feel. And then we start to observe that we're sleeping better and that we're feeling better and that we're less emotional, we're actually more in touch with how we're feeling. We start to eat mindfully, and it changes our relationship to food rather than, I recently saw someone on Instagram, a friend of mine in Australia, who posted something from Adele that was basically saying, I'm never going to diet. I'm this size and I would rather, be obese and put out a great album than be Nicole Richie and put out a crap album, right? And I was like, but that's what, and she was then supporting, chiming in and saying, well, yeah, I'm a curvy girl, I'm never gonna diet, I'm never gonna be thin. And she was arguing for her limitations. And I said, I'm a curvy girl, right? But we still have to do things as a human species if we want quality of life and we want to live at our highest level. And this was a woman who's trying to, live a higher consciousness life and inspire other people to do. You need to live in your physical body. And the further you get away from nature, not just, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but physically, the harder it is to do. And then it impacts the greater environment. And here's a piece that's really politically incorrect, but I have a business partner who was dating, and he's a man who's evolving, and he's wanting to have a more conscious relationship with women. And he went out with a woman who was obese, and he thought she was a beautiful person. They had great rapport. He said, but I couldn't get past the weight, and I felt really bad about myself as a person. And I said, well, you're evolutionarily programmed to choose a partner that's healthy. And it's much harder to be healthy in an overweight body than it is in a thin body, in a fit body. And I always like to say that you can be just as unhealthy in a thin body as you can in an overweight body. So that's,
Right.
But saying that, it's harder to be healthy in an overweight body. And I said, so your natural being repelled by that massive amount of weight is not too dissimilar to anyone being repelled by someone who's emaciated, or anorexic. It's not the human body in the form that makes it a primary partner. So it also communicates to the world two things. One, I'm eating more than my share. Okay, in a tribe, someone who was obese was eating more than their share. And environmentally, that will have an impact on our planet. And the other piece, what it's communicating, which I think is the biggest message, there's pain. You cannot get to that size without a level of unconsciousness, addiction, and pain. And so when someone is arguing for their limitations to say, well, I'm just giving up on dieting, yes, give up on dieting, but don't give up on trying to actually nourish, energize, and protect your body.
I will say one point on that first element of, eating more than your share. You could say that also about high performance athletes though too.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like these guys are,
But they're not looked upon.
No,
with disdain.
they're actually pedestalized.
That's right.
Put on a pedestal. Sure.
That's correct.
Yeah, because at the same time, because obese people do get stares and made fun of, and
Yes.
social pressures
Judged.
and comments and
Yes.
judgments of all different
Absolutely.
kinds. And not that that's nice at all, but there are sort of reasons that are ingrained in us to do that in a sense. So it's of course, you shouldn't go out of your way and be obscene to somebody who is overweight. Of course, you shouldn't.
No.
But it's in a sense.
But are you gonna have
let's
a
say
judgment on
let's
it?
say someone's not as consciously aware of that fact. There's a higher probability that they're going to get made fun of, which could be even more of a snowballing effect. Because okay, the person who is obese has imbalance, is showing some sort of pain in their life, and now everyone's picking on me, and it starts piling on and becoming even worse because people are looking at me strange or with disgust or however they're looking at you. You feel more pain, you eat more. It can be this whole thing that's a positive feedback loop in terms, not that it's treating you positively, but in fact that it's going to actually make you gain more weight.
Amplifying,
right?
compounding.
So, okay, so we know you can't really change people that don't want to be changed, or you can't help people who don't want to be helped.
Yes.
Let's say somebody is in that place where they've been emotional eating for whatever reason. How can they start to identify that they're doing that and start shifting out of those patterns of behavior? Okay,
and if I can just add to that, and in defense of anyone who is actually carrying more weight on their body than nature, is optimal in nature, like you said, there are high performance athletes who are eating in just as unsustainable, unhealthy ways. And I've worked with those. I've worked with clients who have lifestyle diseases, who are elite athletes, NHL hockey players, Australian rules football players, and they have disease and have actually died because they were actually consuming in an unsustainable way and living in a natural lifestyle, right? That was not conducive to their health. So if someone, no matter where they are in the spectrum, has a disordered relationship with food, an unconscious relationship with food, the first place to start is awareness. is consciousness, is mindfulness. And that's, you guys have a business that is dedicated to that. So just that basic thing of being able to get quiet, to get still, to observe the monkey mind, to quiet the mind, to observe what it is that we're eating, observe the relationship with food, to just start to become present to that and start to ask the questions. I'm a big believer in prayer and meditation for actually asking for guidance. I believe that our brains are these receiver modes. When we put out and ask guidance to the universe, we get answers. They come to us. Resources come to us when we can actually project that intelligence out into the world. And that's the beauty of becoming still and quiet. And then the heart is this transmitter.
Yeah. Or even another way to phrase that, if, for people that, aren't in that paradigm, it's just like, it's listening to what your body's truly saying and what you're feeling within your body. You know what I mean? Like that's communicating all the time. Like Will said, like those states of being and those emotions that we're feeling that we're kind of like shoving away. It's like, no, can you actually go lie down in a float tank and be with them for 90 minutes and actually feel them and acknowledge them and see what is this, compassionately inquire.
Yes.
And then maybe, put that question out there, and maybe some answers might come back, or some realizations, or whatever, anything. And it's probably not going to be logical, and it's probably not going to come back in a way that you thought it would, because that's why you haven't seen it yet.
And the other piece around all of this is I did not lose my weight overnight. I did, and even when I lost my weight, it didn't necessarily mean that I no longer had an unhealthy relationship with food. So it took me decades to undo decades of a relationship with food. And so it was not just looking at the physical side of things, the tip of the iceberg, diet and exercise. It was looking at the mental, emotional, spiritual toxicity that was in my life and starting to remove that with nourishing parts that were mental, emotional. It was looking at my relationships, it was self-inquiry, and self-love and compassion, and not expecting me to change and, be perfect.
Now I'm going to flip it around and say, let's say there is somebody in your life that you want to influence and you want to keep them around, you want them to be healthier, and you want to try to influence them to live a healthier lifestyle. How do you think one can go about doing that?
Well, the best way is to live it, and live it from a non-judgmental space. Because what will happen with anyone, so very typical in a relationship, I deal a lot with sugar. So people, who are the only person in their house that's giving up sugar. And so they're like projecting onto the rest of the family, you have to do this, otherwise I can't do this. Which most people don't realize actually people tighten up when there's an expectation on them, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. And so what you have to do is to actually lead by example from a really joyful spot, and not like, ooh, isn't this salad delicious? Oh, you're missing out on, no, that's just, repellent.
It's almost just like, do your thing.
It is.
And that's it.
It is.
Like,
Live by
you
example.
start to project on it and spew it out, and then people, like, even if you're right, they're not going to receive it that way, and it's not going to work. So it's like, just do your own thing. Like you said, lead like by behavior.
Yes.
And just and then
that opens the door,
benefits.
right? It's like if that person sees, oh well, your quality of life has increased dramatically, then maybe they'll come to you, and you don't even have to convince them of anything.
That's the best way. I can tell you it's worked universally within myself. When I'm, around angry, judgmental vegans, I want to eat meat, When
just because like, who are you to tell me what to eat, right?
I'm a rebel.
And a lot of people will default to, and myself included, is like, oh, it's so much harder when I'm on my own, and like, I need people to do it with me. But really, when it comes down to it, it's like, no, you're the one putting the food in your mouth. You're the one making the decisions to eat what you're
being
eating.
Responsible.
Yes.
And it's like, you got to just, where do you take responsibility and just do it?
It's interesting, the parallel, but when you start making those changes in your house about not eating sugar that you might project on everyone else, like Jordan Peterson has a saying around cleaning your room, and it's like, when you go home and you start cleaning your room for the first time and getting organized and getting your life in order, it's going to cause turmoil in your house because you're making these lifestyle changes. And I think it probably is a similar thing with the whole diet, because
it's the mirror effect.
You're going to be changing, and you're trying to improve yourself in some way, And a lot of times, as much as this might not be the right thing to say either, but it's like people sometimes close to you want to pull you back down.
Absolutely.
So it's like, because it is, like Mike said, the mirror, right? It's like if you see somebody trying to elevate, inside of yourself that, you could be doing that too, but you're not for some reason. So you want them to come back to your level. And it could cause relationship problems when you're trying to, to sort out your own health, right?
Yes, and that's when I'm working with people, I'm really big on them sorting out the judgmental piece, because there's this big thing that actually, when you come from absolutely no judgment and you're just working on yourself, I'm not saying it doesn't always, it always happens this way, but what I've found is that you get much more buy-in from people and support from people when they truly feel that you're just wanting to take care of yourself and do it for the good, and there's no expectation put on them. Mm-hmm. They're more curious, they're more inspired than shooting on anyone. And
back to the one point you made before earlier too. What about this idea that you are the average of your 5 closest friends? So if you're in a group of people that are like-minded and wanting to improve their health, wouldn't that have a stronger synergistic effect?
Yes, and I've noticed it many times. I've had people say, just being around you, I get inspired to want to eat better. You don't have to say a word. And that will happen is if you're vibrating on a higher frequency, you're really clean and clear, there's no toxic emissions going out and judgment going out. People are like, oh, that feels good to be around that. Yeah. Maybe I want to feel a bit better.
It's kind of like when you come back from an ayahuasca retreat.
In what sense?
The higher vibrational that I don't know, like I've anecdotally experienced, like when I come back in the immediate time coming back, I don't know, you just kind of have this like magnetic pull that people are just...
What I noticed from that exact same experience, and also from all personal development courses I've taken, like week-long immersion courses, the same effect.
Right. When you shift
it's
yourself.
Weird. Like, when you kind of come out of that environment, and I usually notice it in the airport, because that's when you're the freshest off of these type of experiences. People at the airport staff help you out more. They're nicer. People around you just start talking to you out of nowhere spontaneously. It's so strange. It happens after like the personal development courses I've taken, like the week-long immersion ones, and after ayahuasca retreats, things like that, where you've done some really deep work on yourself, and you come back into the real world. Like, people pick up on that somehow. I don't know how, but it's so... They really do.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're energetic beings. Yeah. And you feel clearer. It's like no toxic emissions.
The clarity thing is a huge part of what I've gained when I get into a really clean diet, like whole foods, natural food state,
Dieta.
Exactly. When you're in that, like the clarity is incredible and like...
It's true.
It's just a whole other level,
It's true too, right?
It's really cool.
When you start cleaning up that area of your life, like it snowballs into every other area.
Right.
I've gone through periods of like extreme healthy eating before, for sure. Mm-hmm. And then I try not to get too obsessive about it either too, right? Yeah. So it's like, but the thing is, it's really easy to slip out of that lifestyle and go back into, because like one bad meal turns into like a day of bad meals, and then a day turns into a week, and all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, what happened, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like, and then when that happens, just pull yourself back a little bit and like, get the trains back on the track and keep going.
It's funny you use that analogy, because Sweet Freedom, one of the reasons we believe that it's effective is community. Like you said, the 5 closest people around you. I refer to Sweet Freedom as a train, and trying to get people on the train, creating an environment on the train, the Sweet Freedom train, that gets people where they have all the resources and supportive community. And the reason I'm bringing up this analogy is because I'm not thinking for a second people aren't going to take a stop, right? My goal is to just have them have less frequent stops getting off the train, and getting on the train much faster when they do get off, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. And I like, again, it's like what you said too, it's a holistic approach, everything feeds into everything else too.
Absolutely.
So the good thing about that is once you get in that healthy routine, it starts snowballing as well.
Yeah.
You can start you can fall off really quick, but you can also accelerate and go, the right direction really quickly as well.
Yeah, like muscle memory when you haven't exercised for a while, but if you've been an elite athlete, it doesn't take as long for it to get back.
Yeah, those neural pathways still developed.
So maybe we'll start to wrap it up, but I want to ask you a question that we haven't asked for a while on the show, but I think this would be a good one, just giving your background that you've shared with us to this minimal point. But if you could make like a phone call back to the 20-year-old or the 25-year-old Sherry, what would you tell her? What kind of advice would you give her, knowing what you know now?
So it would be two pieces of advice. Number one is get quiet and listen to your soul, because it actually knows why it's here and that you're not crazy. And two, just be much kinder and loving to yourself, and to get as much away from that, self-critical thinking, and that, because that was the core of all of, my unconscious relationship with food. Was I had a grand vision for my life, and I had a life that was set up that people thought I was crazy following that. And I was married to someone who thought I was crazy, to think, thoughts of self-grandeur or whatever it was. But it was just really my soul was talking to me. And when I got quiet and listened to that and started to take steps to follow it, and then was just much more kind to that conversations in my head about, not being perfect and not being good enough. I refer to it as the inges. I'm not good enough, or it's not good enough. And when I realized that, well, that's just an evolutionary tool that helps you evolve when you're healthy, and it's unhealthy, it keeps you stuck. That's what I would say to her.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, that was fantastic. That was a super content-rich podcast, I would say.
Yep.
So thank you very much for sitting down with us today. And where do you live again? Duncan, you said?
Dunbar.
Vancouver.
Duncan.
Okay,
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're close.
I'm a local.
Well, you should come back on again sometime, and we
Love
can
to.
dive a little bit deeper. So that's Sherry Strong, and your websites are Return to Food and Sweet Freedom.
.ca.
.ca. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. You guys ask great questions.
And I guess those are the two avenues where people can connect with you. Are you on social media as well?
Yep. Sherry Strong one for Instagram and Facebook. Sherry Strong, you'll find me.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Amazing. Well, I think we can wrap it up today.
Yeah.
Well, if you like what you heard today, folks, please give us a rating and review on iTunes, YouTube, or Stitcher. It really goes a long way to help us get it found. If there's somebody that that could really be helped by this information today, share this episode with them, tag them in the post, or, email it to them, or whatever. Just get it out there in any way that you think is going to help people. So, anything else you want to throw in there?
That's it.
Link up with the communities. Of course, come float, floathouse.ca. Use the promo code Vancouver Real. Get a 20% discount on a single float. Join up with the Vancouver Real meetups and Mindful Mass as well. So all of those things that we always talk about. And, of course, my name is Andy Zaremba, and that's just at Andy Zaremba on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I got all three.
And I'm just Mike Zaremba, and you can come to Floathouse and find me.
Except he's not here too often.
I'm here sometimes.
He's here from time to time. Well, you know how to find us. You all know how to find us by now. So, anyways, thanks so much for listening, and until next time.
To whatever is.